You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Welcome, everyone, back to Engage on the Roddenberry Entertainment channel here on YouTube. And if you don't know what we do here on Engage, what we do is we engage with all of you with your comments and your messages and your emails. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm John Champion, and you set it up perfectly. That's what we do. We engage because, look, we say every week on Mission Log that Mission Log is intended as a conversation. We get our time behind a mic to talk to each other, get our thoughts out there. Now it's time for you to get your thoughts back to us and vice versa and keep it going. So today we're continuing something that we did a couple of days ago, which is to have this fireside chat. Talk about things that are a little more topical. And this is sort of part 2 to what we talked about on Tuesday. And this is about nostalgic characters in Star Trek. Norm, you set me up. I had like a good head of steam going on that last one. I feel like this is just going to be a little more of that. So
continuation of your thought process.
Yeah, yes. Because they're related.
They are.
Where we are now, we're talking about specifically the spoiler. And definitely have thoughts on that. I would rather just have stories revealed to me than building up a mystery for the sake of building a mystery. I'm tired of that, to be quite honest. Yeah. But we're talking now specifically about what that is about, and this is about the nostalgic characters in Star Trek and the power that they have. So the question is this: do nostalgic cameo appearances overhype or overshadow expectations of the series in which they appear? For example, Q and Gainen, so heavily advertised being in Star Trek Picard Season 2, but their involvement so far, as of this recording, somewhat limited. But since they are legendary and legacy characters, we as the fandom perhaps anticipated far more than they were perhaps actually written in the overall series arc. Does this do more harm than good in the fan community? Norman, that is the question posed to you, as we are posing to our audience here as well. What do you think about this?
I think the reality of all of this, from the spoilers to addressing this, it's about expectations. Expectations are very important to fandom, to fan communities, especially to the individual, because we want our heroes represented in the best possible light. We want the characters that we love and have fallen in love with for decades to be represented in a way that still maintains why we love these heroes, what they do for us, how they inspire us, how they make us better, how they have given us this roadmap in our own lives from the past to the present and now to the future. But what if they don't have the same resonance, the same staying power, because their involvement in these series isn't what we expected them to be? And we built that up in our heads. We built that anticipation up and said, I can't wait to see my hero, the character that I love, or the character that inspires me, the character that I remember from years past, episode to episode to episode. And sometimes we'll get maybe one episode with them, or a half an episode with them, or just an appearance, and that's it.
Yeah.
What does that do?
I think, unfortunately, what it's doing is trading on nostalgia. And I'm not saying that nostalgia is necessarily a bad or illegitimate concept to build a story around. I think that's okay, but I think it is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle and a much bigger set of tools that a writer would have to tell a story. Mm-hmm. Since I just saw the re-release of the motion picture, Star Trek the Motion Picture in 4K, and I'm thinking about what the buildup was to that and how the expectation was simply just get these characters back on screen and we get to carry on from there. And as long as we reunited with these characters after 10 years, then that's sort of the biggest hurdle that movie had to get across. Mm-hmm. But then they did something pretty wise, which is going into the next movie for a number of reasons, really let those characters age and let the story be about that and feel like a natural extension of what they're doing. And we start to lose some of those characters over time, And I feel like where we are now, especially if we're talking about the what's happening in Picard, is that it's almost like pulling their punches. Like we're a little too afraid to just tell the story of the cast that we have and the situations that we have, and with the reality of who Picard is now, as opposed to who he was 30 years ago. It's like we're a little too afraid to do that, and we just have to placate an audience, maybe with an expectation that isn't even there, but this feeling, well, we have to placate an audience or else they won't really understand that it's Star Trek unless we get all of these characters back in their recognized roles, and that then is our job of creating Star Trek. And I don't think it is. I really don't. I mean, if we're just looking at Q and Guinan on their own, yeah, it might have been a calculated misdirect to say here they are and they're so important to it. And granted, Q looms large because he either created or is at least a part of, even if he's a victim of this situation that's going on. But then Guinan almost seems like an afterthought.
We saw Gainen in two different forms.
We did.
So it's the aspect of Gainen, I think, is probably a little bit larger.
Yeah. I'm look, I'm curious as hell one day when this is all behind us to like sit down with some of the writers and just find out like what was the decision-making process there. Like, honestly, what came first? Was it the story, or was it the prospect of just reuniting these elements that we think made for what was the best Star Trek? So now if we don't do that, we're going to miss out on making something that's important and impactful. And it might be unfair because we're in the middle of season 2 of Picard.
Right.
And we haven't seen any of Strange New Worlds yet because that's related to the topic earlier this week. Might be a little unfair, and we need to come back to this at the end. But yeah, I'm getting a little lost in the nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, along with the cleverly placed spoilers.
My concern at this point in time, and I did say this on social media, where I was like, you know what? I just think I need to stop analyzing episode per episode and maybe return to it all when it's all said and done, so that I'm looking at it from, the full narrative perspective. I feel like at the end of every episode, it's not the end of the episode. It's like where we would go to commercial break in a standard 4-act show.
Right.
Each individual episode is its own act. Cut to commercial break, start of the next episode, return from commercial break, ad nauseum to the end.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the way to approach this. But I think that what happens when you bring in legacy characters is that you take away from the characters that you've been developing.
Yeah.
And so far in where we're at in Picard, probably halfway through, I would say, certain characters that I really, really wanted to see developed, I believe, aren't getting the due diligence and the time that they need to continue the story that was so interesting from the first season. Now, that's not to say that we won't get there, because there's still 4 or 5 episodes left from the time of this recording.
Yeah.
And that may happen, but it would be a certainty if the new cast, were the focal point, as opposed to bringing in legacy characters for them to take away some of the lion's share of the production.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, if those things are going to happen, I would like to be, it's not even about the surprise element. I just want to feel like it is a natural extension of the story. And believe me, we'll get into this again when we get to talking about like Star Trek Into Darkness or something like that. It's just, I want to feel like the things that are important because they organically evolve from the story that was being told. Not like we're dangling this mystery in front of you and you better watch or you'll be left out of this mystery. And in this case, that dangling mystery is, how do we get everybody back together, and why, and for what purpose? And right now, the only thing we have to go on is, well, because you figured that fans wanted it and you just appeal to their sense of nostalgia. So I don't mean saying, I don't want to sound down about all of this.
Well, I think it's just very concerning, and I think that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's responsible for us to just basically ask the question,
Yeah.
and then see how you all respond to it, because we are, after all, engaging with all of you.
Yes, exactly. And well, why don't you tell people where they can engage with us, and then they engage with us now, and they can engage with us, months and years later when these stories have unfolded. And we'll see how we feel about it then.
Yeah, you can always drop your comments in the comments section below, and make sure that you follow us here at Roddenberry Productions, or Roddenberry Prod here on the YouTube channel. Make sure that you send your comments to missionlog@roddenberry.com so we can engage with you there. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at MissionLogProd. And remember, we may engage with your comments either here or there on the air.